Okay, let's talk about Associated Press style rules for quotation marks. Okay, obviously the most basic usage for quotation marks would be quotations. Okay, things that were said by newsmakers, by people you've interviewed. Also, you'll use them around nicknames. You'll always use them around composition titles. And there's a whole entry in the style book on this, and I'm going to do a whole separate video covering composition titles at some point. But we're talking about titles of books, TV shows, movies, things like that. By the way, none of those things go in italics. None of them get underlined. So the stuff you learned in other style guides, just forget it. They go in quotation marks. Nothing else happens to them. In ironic usages, you want to be careful about editorializing, but that is an acceptable use of quotation marks, and defining unfamiliar terms. So we'll look at some examples of each of these. Also, we'll want to pay attention to the use of the most common use, which would be double quotation marks like this, and some special instances where we need to use just a single quotation mark like that. But obviously in American punctuation, the double quotation mark is by far the most common. Singles are pretty rare. Okay, let's go through these quickly. Okay, in quotations there's different kinds. So we have full quotes. What I mean by that is you get a full sentence, full grammatical sentence with some attribution. You got to put quotation marks around it. Notice these are double quotation marks, and the comma goes inside. If this needed to be the end of a sentence, then there'd be a different punctuation mark there. There'd be a period. Just some other examples of that. Double quote marks in this quote. Notice a comma here because the attribution is attached to the sentence. And then at the end of the full quote, we have a period because there's no other attribution needed there. But again, double quotes all the way through. Look at one more example that is a little bit different. Here again we have a full sentence quote. You'll notice in this case where this was actually 3 sentences. I own too many books, complete thought, period. I don't know when I'll ever have time to read them, another complete thought, period. They are taking up too much space, another complete thought, ending in a period. Here we have one sentence, and the attribution has actually been spliced into the middle of it, which is acceptable. So you have a comma here. The difference is you have a comma here to indicate that the sentence is now continuing. We've paused to give you attribution. Now we're going to continue the sentence. So a comma, lowercase letter, because this is not the beginning of the sentence, and then ending here with the period. Okay, so those are all examples of full sentence quotes. Now let's take a look at some, I did it again, that are simply partial sentences. And deleting that, or rather partial quotes. So partial quote is when the full frame of the sentence, if you will, is paraphrased by the writer, but you've spliced part of a complete sentence, a portion of a sentence, into the quote, like this. President Barack Obama called the group's actions, quote, totally unacceptable behavior in the civilized world. So that's only this last phrase here that is a direct quote from Obama. The rest of the sentence has simply been paraphrased, and there's some specific guidelines in the style book on using this. One thing you want to avoid is partial quotes that are too short, like 1 or 2 words, especially when the 1 or 2 words aren't very unique, aren't very quote worthy. You want to avoid doing partial quotes in those instances. One that does tend to confuse people is a running quote. This is where you have a quoted passage that runs on for more than one paragraph, and people always look at this and think that this must be some sort of super secret news writing Associated Press style guideline, but this is not. This is actually the way that punctuation is used, the way that quotation marks are used in all systems of punctuation. It just simply comes up more in in news writing because we tend to use lots of short paragraphs, and because of that we tend to break up long quotes into multiple paragraphs, hence the need to use this little trick. But what you'll notice about this, first of all, is that we should indent these paragraphs. Okay, so now we have 2 paragraphs. This is one long quoted passage. You'll notice that we've got an open quote here, a close quote, the attribution, another open quote, so the same person is still speaking. Now we get down to the end of this paragraph and there's no mark right there. Then the next paragraph begins with an open quotation mark. This is a clue to the reader that this quote is continuing and the same person is still talking, that we have not changed speakers. So no mark here, an open quote there, and then a closed quote at the end. That's how you use partial quotes. So doesn't happen very often, but when you do have some longer passages of quoted material in a story and you need to break it up into multiple paragraphs, that is how you would do it. Okay, let's look at some things that don't have to do with quotations. As I said, we're going to have a longer video on composition titles, but this is just an example of what I'm talking about. The fact that Community couldn't draw enough viewers to survive proves that Americans are stupid. So here we have the title of a TV show in quotation marks. Notice that again we're using double quotation marks. And again, that is the default usage. I see a lot of people who will do this correctly, except that they will put single quotes around single words. Maybe that looks right to you, but it's not. So you just use the double quotation marks, just like in anything else. Okay, nicknames are another usage here. Throw out a couple of names of famous people. Lewis Scooter Libby. He was a Bush administration guy, got in some hot water over leaking information and whatnot. Lynette Squeaky Frome, she tried to kill Gerald Ford. So, famous figures of mystery. But anyway, the nickname part goes in quotation marks. And usually, in AP, if you're going to use a nickname, and the nickname is the only part of the name that you're using, you don't do the quotes. So, for example, if you were going to say Eldrick, spelled it wrong, Tiger Woods, that would be correct, but the nickname for him is so common that it's pretty much used as his name in news stories, so he would just be Tiger Woods. You don't put that part in quotation marks. Okay. All right, I mentioned earlier that irony was a one usage of quotation marks in news stories. You want to be careful about this. If you're using it to convey some unacceptable levels of editorializing or snark in a story, then you might want to be careful about it. But if you need to do it, this is how it would work. Okay, the school's student center, you can almost think of those quotation marks as substituting for the words so-called. At least that's the connotation that the reader's going to read into it. So if that's your intent, then that's okay. You just want to be careful that you don't do it when you don't mean to. Let's talk about defining unfamiliar terms. We might do this if there's a technical term or something that would not be common to the audience reading the story. So in a certain context, maybe this would be appropriate. Billy Beane helped the A's win by using sabermetrics, advanced baseball statistics named for the Society for American Baseball Research. So the term is given and it's then explained, and you put the quotes around it so that people see, okay, here's a term I'm giving you, and I'm going to, in a minute, explain what that term means. And that's how you would use that. And finally, let's talk about quotes within quotes. What do I mean by this? Well, sometimes you're quoting someone, and in the course of speaking, they then quote someone. Here's an example of just from the style book. She said, quote, "He told me," now she's going to quote the person who is talking to her, "I love you," period. And that needs to end with so we need a single quote here to indicate the quoted passage within the quote, and then a double quote here and another double quote at the end to close it all up. So yes, this looks weird with 3 at the end, but that's how it needs to be done. So you have the 1 here that matches up with the 1 there, and then the 2 here that matches up with the 2 here, and that's how that needs to look. It works just the same way if you have other uses of quotes within quotes. So for example, if we use the nickname like we had before, Lewis Scooter Libby, now this has to be a single quote because it is contained within a set of double quotes. That's fairly self-explanatory, I think. This can go on and on. So if you have a quote within a quote within a quote, you just alternate. The outermost ones get double quotes. The next level down gets a single quote mark. The level within that gets doubles. So you just alternate back and forth as many times as needed. If it's getting too confusing, maybe just don't do it at all. Okay, that's just a quick summary of the different uses of quotation marks.